It's a pleasure to say hello again. We have the chapter 12 before us of John, the entry into Jerusalem. And I think it opens up for us many of the hidden doorways that we've all been trying to enter. The importance of truth cannot be overstressed. If you follow what appears to be a truth, but isn't, naturally you're going to run into difficulty. And to find what is truth and what is not, what to follow and what not to follow, has been one of the major problems, if not the major problem of our world. What shall we follow? What is the truth? I, says the Christ, am the truth. Now what does that leave you to follow beside I, the Christ? Unless, of course, you're of the opinion that there is another truth than the Christ. As you know, the world is of another opinion. I don't wish to necessarily imply that we have 1/3 people out of their homes today because there are floods in 8 different states, because they don't know Christ, or that we have a war in Vietnam because we don't know Christ, and so on down the list. But if we do not follow truth, we are in violation of it. And you may have discovered that if you do not have a relationship with truth, that your life suffers. Whereas when you have a relationship with truth, your life turns right around and yields back to you the truth of that relationship. In other words, you act in conformity with your relationship to truth. And this is how you sow to the truth or not to the truth. But to know the truth is necessary before you can act in relationship to it. And we have all been unaware of the depth of the truth that we must know. We have relied on human methods. And at times we have relied on psychic methods. And other times we have relied on authorities. Other times we have relied on the literal meanings of the Bible. And again we have relied on authors. We have relied on everything except Christ. And our reason was that we could not find Christ. We could talk about Christ. We could say, I am the Christ. We could read about Christ. We could see what Christ does in the form of Jesus. But we could not find the Christ of our own being. And that's the only place where you can find the truth. What I say unto you is the truth. And unless you hear my voice, unless you are one with Christ of your own self, for you there is no divine guidance, and that which you follow is not the truth. The Lord does not build your house, and ultimately the termites come in, the flood comes in, the rain comes in. The foundation of it proves to be untruth. This chapter, along with all the others, emphasizes that there is only one truth. There aren't many truths. There's not the truth of Buddhism and the truth of Sufism and the truth of Christianity and the truth of Muslims and the truth of Hindus and the truth of Judaism. There isn't a truth in everything that is different from another truth somewhere else. There is only truth, and it isn't divided. And truth is always the same. It never changes. If today you are in a different truth than you are in yesterday, then yesterday's truth was not truth at all. And if what you call truth today is going to be a new truth for you tomorrow, then the truth you have today is not truth. And finally, you must see that the only truth there is the truth that is always the same truth. And so the world goes on, not really looking for truth, but looking for security, looking for a better life. Now, we in this class are not making that mistake. We're looking for truth. And if you haven't realized that's what you're looking for, please nail it down. That's what you should be looking for, truth. Now, fortunately, the truth comes from Christ. And when the Christ utters a word, whether it's through Zechariah or Joel Goldsmith, it's still truth. When Christ speaks, that's truth. And you can count on it. It won't change tomorrow. It'll be truth 5 million human years from now, 5 million immortal years from now. The truth 2,000 years ago is the truth this instant. If it isn't, it's not truth. Now let's look at prophecy and see the difference between psychic prophecy, the prophecy of a human mind reaching into cosmic levels of thought, and spiritual prophecy. And you'll see the difference between truth and the deception of truth. We're going to look here at Zechariah. Here he is in 9:9, saying something that we're going to read about in our chapter 12. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh. Unto thee he is just, and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. This is Zechariah in the Old Testament. This is a prophecy. Who makes this prophecy? Zechariah? No. I, Christ, speak through Zechariah. This is I, Christ, saying, your king comes. He is just and having salvation. Salvation. Lowly. And riding upon an ass and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. This is I, Christ, speaking through Zechariah about salvation. Here's John 12. And Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written. Now then, the question is, why does this prophecy come true? Think of the years between the making of the prophecy and the appearance thereof into the visible world. Who spoke the prophecy? I, Christ, spoke the prophecy. Who enacts the prophecy? Who comes forth doing precisely what was prophesied? The very one who had spoken the prophecy. I, Christ, speaking through Zechariah. I, Christ, acting through Jesus. Do you see why the prophecy must come true when it's a spiritual prophecy? The prophesier and the doer are one and the same. Do you see that when the voice speaks through you, that he who speaks through you will perform that which he speaks? I go before you to make the crooked places straight. I who speak unto you, through you, in you. I am the truth, and that is why I am the way. When the Lord builds the house, you labor not in vain. But unless I speak through you, to give you the truth, the guidance, the wisdom, the daily bread, the knowledge, the understanding, the love, the direction, what are you going to do? You're going to have to do it yourself. But when I, the Lord, speak unto you, I perfect and I perform all that concerneth you. I perform that which you are ordained by me to do. And so in this, riding on the foal, on the colt, is the message that we have to now look at carefully, for it is the token of the new consciousness on the earth breaking through the mortal mind. So here, after the prophecy, Jesus rides in to Jerusalem on a colt. Now Matthew gives it one way, Mark gives it another way, John gives it a third way. They're all the same. I think maybe we should look at the two. We're not going to study that carefully. Let's look at Mark and Matthew, and you'll see something interesting. In Mark, it's at 11:2. There's one phrase here that's very important. Jesus saith unto them, he sendeth forth two of his disciples and saith unto them, go your way into the village over against you, and as soon as ye be entered into it, you shall find a colt tied. And listen to this phrase, whereon never man sat. A colt tied, whereon never man sat. Loose him and bring him. Now this is a colt on which no man has ever sat. Then over here in Matthew, this will be the 21st chapter and the second verse. We'll do it a little differently. Saying unto them, go into the village over against you, and straightway ye shall find an ass tied, and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them unto me. Here it's not just the colt, but it's the mother of the colt. The two, the ass and the colt. And over here, it's a colt on which no man has sat, and now John does it this way. Jesus, when he had found a young ass, and therefore he's got the colt on which no man has sat. And so that's what he's riding into Jerusalem on, the colt on which no man has sat. And this is the prophecy of Zechariah appearing visibly in the world. Now let's go back to the beginning of this particular episode to catch the meaning. On the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna! Blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. Now, to come in the name of the Lord means to be the truth of God. And we know that this is the Christ of God, Jesus, appearing as Jesus to man. And this Christ is the truth of God, comes in the name of the Lord. Later, this same Christ will say, follow me. Follow the truth of the Lord. We find palm branches there. Now, why is he riding the young colt? It's the new birth, isn't it? The new consciousness. And why was it an ass and not a giraffe? Why was it not a gorilla? Because it's a dumb beast, isn't it? Because it represents the lower nature of man. It represents that capacity in man which cannot see further than his nose. The emotional side, the lower mental side, the passions that are uncontrollable, the desire realm of man. But he's riding on it. He has tamed it. Why has he tamed it? Because in the new birth, Christ rides on the new consciousness. So riding into Jerusalem, we find, is a new consciousness with Christ in the saddle. And wisely John has taken this and placed it after the resurrection of Lazarus again. Why? Because this is the new consciousness on the earth that was evinced by the change in consciousness of Lazarus. The lower nature of man, the world mind, which functions as the lower nature of man, has been tamed. The Christ has entered human consciousness, dissolving the illusion of mortal sense. And you'll find there's another place in either Matthew or Mark where he's instructed to, the two disciples are instructed to find this colt where two places meet. You'll find that's the symbol of the cross, and the place where the two places meet is where the human sense of body is erased. Right on the cross is where the human sense of body is shown to be erroneous. The place where two places meet is where they find the colt. That's where you find your new consciousness, at the place where two places meet. When you can overcome the body sense, you find that you are subduing the lower nature of man. You are providing no channel for the world mind. You are overcoming all levels of human resentment and jealousy and envy, the baser passions. And Christ mounts the colt, just as Christ stood before the woman of Samaria and then sat on the well of her consciousness. Now we're ready to ride into Jerusalem because we're in the new consciousness. Man of earth, mortality has been overcome. The new consciousness is conscious of immortality. Matter, man of matter, has been overcome. The new consciousness is conscious of spiritual identity. Riding into Jerusalem on a young colt, the Master is teaching us this is a pathway to salvation. Up to now, in the human consciousness, salvation meant being good, being honest, being virtuous, tithing, getting on your knees before the Lord, reciting doctrinal prayers and formulae, looking out and doing good to your neighbor. All of this was called the road to salvation. And everybody who followed it found it wasn't the road to salvation at all. They didn't find salvation, they found death. and they found problems on the way to death. And when they had died, they didn't receive salvation. They came back into more bodies and started all over again, looking again for salvation. Because they hadn't ridden into Jerusalem on a young colt. The young colt with Christ in the saddle is divine wisdom. Truth. Truth that is ever truth. Truth you can depend on to take you into Jerusalem, which is the higher consciousness. The glory of heaven on earth, New Jerusalem. And they put palm branches in the way because those who saw were aware of a presence. And the palm branches signified inner peace. And from it we have our Palm Sunday, which should signify the awareness of the presence of Christ in us as the Prince of Peace, making eternal peace within us. And these would strew the way to salvation, but now salvation is something totally different than being good and then going to heaven. Salvation is spiritual evolution in consciousness leading to transition. Not dying, but making ascension out of corporeality. And it can only be done after the second baptism. We who have been baptized but once by human birth cannot make the journey into Jerusalem. The second baptism, signified by Lazarus, made possible this journey. The second baptism is signified again by Christ riding on the new birth, not the old. Ishmael, the son of the handmaid, must go that Isaac may rise in consciousness. The natural birth must be followed by the baptism of the Spirit, the rebirth. And this rebirth done here now on earth is a phase in the second baptism, which leads to riding on the colt into Jerusalem. And now this has been accomplished on the earth. And to some extent, part of the world is aware of something going on which calls for palm branches in the road and hosannas, implying an awareness of the presence and the possibility of salvation. But between this beginning of the journey and the end, there will be sorrow, because the journey carries with it many trials and many tribulations as you approach the ascension. And we are not being led to expect all to be choir music and angels, but rather to know that there are many thorns at this level, all very necessary ones, to lift us beyond a certain remnant of mentality into the immaculate self lived in. Now I, through Zechariah, predicted the new consciousness. The young colt, which was stepping out of the old man into the new. And then I, through Jesus, appeared riding the colt. And I then am the truth that is leading men into Jerusalem. Freedom from mortality. The salvation turns out to be freedom from mortality. Freedom from everything leading to death. I am the only way man can make transition, and I am the Christ of your being. Whoever is not following the Christ within is not going to know truth, and is going to have to perform those acts which only the Christ can perform. So if your question is, how do I know truth? The answer is, you only know it when it is spoken by Christ in you, by Christ in the Bible, by Christ in a seer, by Christ in a prophet. By Christ, and only by Christ, is truth given. And it can be the Christ of Buddha, the Christ of Mohammed, but it must be the Christ, not a man. No opinions of a person. And when you hear it in yourself, you can tell whether it is the Christ or the world mind. You develop the capacity to distinguish between the wheats and the tares, to recognize your master's voice. And even when the voice is silent, you hear it with the inner ear, and you feel it with the Christ mind. Now, this path to truth is the narrow way. It erases all opinions, all guesses, all speculation, and all authorities, all experts. It tells every theologian that unless Christ is speaking through you, you have nothing to tell me. And it sets every religious authority in proper focus. Because unless a man speaks out of Christ, he is not speaking the Word. And if you follow that Word that is not spoken out of Christ, you're not on the new colt. You're riding the old jackass, and it won't get you where you're going. Says Jesus, "Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, the king cometh, thy king cometh, sitting on an ass's coat." Now Zion, or Sion, are one and the same. You'll remember this is the elect of Israel, those who have been chosen to know the Word, to attain the fullness of the Christ. And here you might say, Christ is assuring us that inevitably, mankind will ride upon the colt, that the Christ consciousness must appear on this earth. There is no power to stop it. This is the assurance, "Fear not, O daughter of Zion. Behold, thy king cometh, sitting on an ass's colt." This is the assurance that Christ's consciousness will form your consciousness. It is the assurance that it was on the earth at that moment that he spoke it. And who would know better than the Christ if it was on the earth or not? It was leading those who had ears to hear. And so it is at this moment that when you behold floods and various other forms of human destruction, you are also beholding the invisible Christ consciousness. You may not see it at the moment, but it is the very Christ consciousness on the earth which makes that appear which we call the flood. Perhaps we'll see that in a little while. These things understood not his disciples at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then remembered they that these things were written of him, such as Zechariah's prophecy, and that they had done these things unto him. And so we find here that the disciples who were partners in the march into Jerusalem were completely unaware of the meaning of it. They were there in body, and they witnessed the physical events. But John wants us to know at that time they didn't know what was happening. It was only after the glorification of Christ Jesus when the miracle of no death had been presented to them, they could understand and connect it up to the entry into Jerusalem of the new consciousness which never knows death. They were like children. Long before they really understand what you're doing, you train them. And then as they grow up, that training becomes very effective. And finally they understand what they couldn't understand when you trained them. And here the disciples were part of that early training. What it meant they didn't know, but they had to do what they were told to do. You will discover or have wondered who went to get the colt. And I think you'll find that Peter and John were the two who were sent, although it doesn't say so. Because that colt was a new consciousness, and these two were the most advanced of the disciples. Now you may remember that we discovered last week that, or several weeks back, that the resurrection of Lazarus was an invisible event. So I was very pleased to discover here a confirmation of it in the next verse of John. The people, therefore, that was with him when he called Lazarus out of his grave and raised him from the dead, bear record. Now, the people who bear record of the death of Lazarus and the raising out of the grave was probably John himself. That editorial we. Just like Joel says, we know you can stop an earthquake. We know you can stop a tidal wave. And who's the we who knows it? Joel. The people who were with him when he raised Lazarus from the dead are John. Mary and Martha were there too. But it was an invisible event. And so John bare record of it. He could witness the invisible. And he confirms that even further here. For this cause the people also met him, for that they heard that he had done this miracle. You see, some see within, and then others hear without. And so thanks to John, we have the record of these invisible happenings, and again the record of the meaning of the ride into Jerusalem on the colt, emphasizing the young colt. And Mark emphasized the colt no one had sat upon. This was the new consciousness on the earth that no one had sat upon. the realization of spiritual identity now, immortal self now, child of God now, not a dying creature. And yet the significance of that is still not fully understood. And we're going to have to deepen our significance, our understanding of the significance of what it means to be a child of God, an immortal self now, a spiritual identity now, an infinite being now. And we're going to have to do that today. The Pharisees, therefore, said among themselves, "Perceive ye how ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him." And so the Pharisees, in spite of thinking they were merely making a comment, they were prophesying a truth. Behold, the world has gone after him. They too, without really realizing what they had said, had predicted that the world would turn to Christ. And it is. The situation was getting out of hand there. Those who had seen the miracles of Jesus were not aware of what he was teaching, but they were following him. He wasn't fooled by this outer demonstration of palm trees, palm branches, and hosannas. They knew nothing of what he was teaching. They were going by outer signs. He was teaching the truth comes only through the inner Christ. And that truth is power. That truth is ordained. That truth is the pathway to transition, which is the only salvation there is. Salvation is transition. Transition is salvation. Salvation is the big promise of religions. But it does not promise transition. It never heard of it. And transition alone is salvation. Transition from man of earth to child of God, living in your spiritual self. This is salvation. This isn't a future heaven. This is a heaven now. This isn't a future peace. This is a peace now. The pathway to Jerusalem here is the pathway to life eternal. And you must be in the truth of the new birth. For only the new birth is one with God. Only the new birth is in the one divine consciousness. Only the new birth takes us out of duality. The baptism of the Spirit, the second baptism, takes us out of the duality of being a creature separated from God into the one undivided divine consciousness which alone manifests its own selfhood as our being. Christ on the coat is the union of identity and truth in you as oneself, moving, guided, totally riding on the truth of Christ's identity. I'd like to plant the seed then at this point of the depth that we must go to realize Christ's identity. You've all been willing to say yes. We can see that mortal mind influence us to see things that aren't there, that weren't God created. We've been willing to say that we're under a state of hypnosis. Something else is missing, isn't it? Suppose you close your eyes with me and think of a dream you may have had. Any dream. And remember how real it was. And how when you awakened, everything that happened in the dream vanished. It was all in the dream. Suppose we invent a dream right now. Suppose in your dream you have a man who is building a house. And suppose he's going to move into that house with his new bride. And suppose he painstakingly builds it, using his hard-earned savings to get just the right appearance, the right materials, the right location. And now along comes a flood in one of these 8 states and wipes it away. Suppose the man now is looking for the girl who is to marry him and move into this house and he can't find her. Suppose she's one of the 1/3 of a million who are homeless, and maybe among those who are lost. Suppose as you go through this dream, you see how deeply the man is hurt, how he's grieving, how he's worried, how his whole life has been put into jeopardy, how every plan has been shattered. And then you wake up. No house, no flood, no man, no bride, no tragedy. Where was it? It was in the dream. Everything that happened was in the dream. But what is a dream? You didn't sit down and plan that dream in your sleep. It happened in the dream. Something made that happen, and there was nothing you could do about it. It happened without your wish, without your desire, without your plan, without your premeditated thought. It thought itself right through you. And it was real. It was so real that you were very relieved when you awakened and found that it was unreal. And in that dream, the man was so real, the young man. The house was real, you could describe it. The colors, the materials, the view, the number of rooms. You could see the builders putting it up. It was all so real, but what was it? It was thought. It was your thought. But it wasn't your awake thought, your conscious thought, your planned thought. It was your involuntary thought. It was thought that was placed there by a force that was dreaming its thought into you, thinking its thought into your dream. And everything and every person in the dream would have thought he had free will, a life of his own, a heart of his own, lungs of his own, a body of his own, but he hadn't. The fabric of the dream was the thought of the dreamer. And the dreamer being asleep, not in conscious thought, there was someone else dreaming thinking through you. As you lay in bed asleep, something was putting this into your mind. And we're going to call that the world mind, the dreamer, forcing its thought into you while you slept. And you can accept that that dream was not your personal voluntary thought. You can accept that it was put there, and you had no control over it whatsoever. It was uncontrolled thought. At least it wasn't controlled by you. But now comes the Christ saying to us, "Awake, thou that sleepest." And we must ask ourselves, is that what is actually happening to us? Instead of our dreaming about a house going up, about a flood, about people whose lives are shattered, are we that boy in the dream? Will we awake and discover that what we are doing while we think we're awake is only a dream? The boy in the dream thought he was awake. It never occurred to him that he wasn't. It never occurs to us that we're anything but awake. Then why are we told to awake? Is it possible that we are the characters in the dream? That the houses we're building are made of the very same substance that we're made of? That the rivers around us are made of the very same substance that we're made of? That our world is made of the same substance that we're made of? That all of this is thought of another dreamer than ourselves? That we are the characters in someone else's dream? Can you conceive of that? Maybe you had better, because you're going to be asked to go that far in order to know truth. You're going to have to discover for yourself that your world is a dream. Not you're just hypnotized, not that it's a suggestion, not that it's an appearance, but that we are made of thought. And the world mind is thinking, dreaming what we seem to experience. Now, when you can go that far, you will know that everything you're looking at is in the dream, and it is the same substance as you are. It doesn't matter what you see. It's the dream. It doesn't matter what you think. It's the dream. Or touch, or feel, or hear. It's the dream. And when you can go that far to accept, or to even give thought to the possibility, and then to meditate upon it until you can understand that you're not God's creation as a physical human being. Therefore, what are you? If you're not God's creation as a physical human being, what are you? And finally, we come to that conclusion: I must be a dream. The very self that I'm so proud of is not a mortal at all, and it's not going to become an immortal. It's a dream. Everyone I know has to be a dream, because that which is not God created is not creation. Does God create floods and kill? God's creation? Does God turn 1/3 of a million people homeless in floods? Does God build tombstones? Does God build battlefields? What's happening? You're seeing the world dream. And you say it's impossible. It can't be a dream. And God says, but that's all it is. My kingdom is reality. What is the world? My kingdom is not of this world. What is the world? It's time to stop calling it hypnosis. It's time to stop calling it an appearance. It's time to stop calling it matter. It's time to stop calling it anything except what it is, a dream. And you're not dreaming it. You're as much the dream as the characters in your dream, and they have no will, but they think they have. They have no independence, but they think they have. And the moment you stop and dwell upon it, you'll find that you've never been able to control this dream. You can't control your life, and the reason you haven't is because you can't control a dream. No character in your dream has ever controlled his life. It was controlled for him. And the minute you awakened, his dream, his life, his dream life vanished. Lazarus awakened. We cannot know it from this side of the veil, but his dream life vanished. Jesus awakened. His dream life vanished. Whenever you awake, and there are moments when you do, your dream life vanishes, but you're not aware of it. You say, I feel so beautiful, so strange. It's all one. I don't see individuals. I feel a peace. Yes, because you're not in the dream. You're not in that controlled dream of the world mind. The second baptism doesn't come while we're trying to make the dream a happy dream, a better dream, a comfortable dream. It only comes when we're willing to face the fact that flesh is the dream. Corporeality is the dream. And the good of it and the bad of it are the dream. We read about Adam. And in his sleep it says that Eve came out of his rib, formed out of his rib. It's more than just a symbol. It's telling you that he was dreaming. And he dreamed of woman. And then he dreamed of a world. And then he dreamed of evil. And then he dreamed of serpents. Everything after Adam is a dream. Right from Eve. We're the dream of Adam. We're still the dream of Adam. And it's only when you step out of the dream of the world mind that you discover you never were the person, the mortal, the creature, the flesh, the form. In order to be reborn of the Spirit, we must first accept the truth that if God is all, and God is not that which dies, then the flesh which dies I cannot be. It must be the dream. The channel for the dream is obviously the human mind. But the human mind isn't dreaming. The human mind is still the substance of the dream. The dreamer is the world mind. Somebody asked me about Lucifer today. There he is. The world mind dreaming is Lucifer. That's the fallen. That's the conflict in heaven, the war in heaven. But it's all part of a purpose. It's only when we come to the realization that the world mind dreaming is dreaming the world that we are in. Then we can see that the world mind dreams its dream through your mind. Your mind becomes a channel for the dream of the world. It dreams bodies. It dreams rivers. It dreams planets. It dreams a whole universe of matter. And the subject and the object and the actions and the motions and the lifespans, even the reincarnations, are all part of the dream. Every one of the reincarnated lives you may have lived are part of the dream. That is the substance of them. I, the Christ, never is incarnate. The word incarnation is misunderstood. There is flesh and there is flesh. There is mortal flesh, which is dream flesh, and there is spiritual flesh, which is reality. Christ is spiritual flesh. Lazarus reborn is spiritual flesh. Jesus Christ reborn is spiritual flesh. And when you say Christ incarnate, that means in spiritual flesh. The word incarnate is incorrect because its connotation is material flesh. Christ manifest is more accurate. Incarnate is often used and then abused because it has two meanings. Its first meaning is in the flesh, human flesh. When it's used by a mystic, it means in the spiritual flesh. Now, you have never been incarnate in material flesh. That's the dream. And so when you reincarnate, that's just a repetition of the dream. And the reason the dream is repeated and repeated and repeated is because we're still in the dream. The pathway to salvation is out of the dream. And so first, incarnation is the illusion of being in the flesh. That is the meaning of incarnation. The illusion of flesh. Reincarnation is the return to the illusion of flesh. No actual incarnation exists because there is no flesh. And no reincarnation exists because there is no flesh to reincarnate into. But until we learn we're in the dream and what to do about it, we never come out of it, and as a result, we don't make our transition, we don't attain salvation. We come back into the illusion of another incarnation. So we're on the wheel of reincarnation, or the wheel of illusion, repeated and repeated and repeated until that day when Lazarus walks out of the tomb. When you ride on the colt of wisdom, divine truth, and it leads you on the pathway to transition out of the dream, which is all that ascension ever meant. To ascend out of the dream of this world. Now, most of us have accepted in one way or another that Adam had a dream, or that we're in a dream, or the world is a dream, but we have never really taken it as a must to sit down and face this truth and do something about it. We figure, oh well, something will happen. But you're wrong, something won't happen. You have to lift the veil of the dream. And so we'll come to grips with that dream very quickly. And let's see that the dream is thought. That the fabric of the world is thought. And it isn't God's thought at all. God's not thinking forest fires. God's not thinking murders and suicides and accidents. God's not thinking diseases. In him is no darkness at all. Who's thinking these things? We are, and the world mind in us is. Just as the characters in your dream were really your thought. They had no thought of their own. We have no thought of our own, but we think we have. The only thought we have is the thought which comes from the world mind through us and becomes what we think is my thought. I'm going to do this today. What about the characters in your dream when they decided to do something? They've decided to build a house. Did they really? Were they building a house? Where's the house? You awakened and the house was gone. You think you built houses. Did you? Or did world mind build them through you out of thought, which you accepted as your thought, and called it a building? You think you're building a life. Are you? Or is world mind through you building its thought as the fabric of your life? Now look, we're in the highest mysticism we can get at this moment, and I want you to see very carefully that whatever you're looking at, everywhere in this world, you're not looking at anything at all except your own thought. That's all you can ever see. You're not seeing a mountain, you're seeing your thought about what you call a mountain. You're not seeing a river. You're not seeing anything except your thought. This is important. And when you know that you're seeing your thought, you will understand why Isaiah, speaking from the inner Christ, said, "My thoughts are not your thoughts." Your thoughts are from the world mind, from the Lucifer mind. You're looking out, and you're seeing the thoughts of the deceiver, which you're calling this world of things. And it is not your Father's kingdom. It is not reality. It is dream thought, and you're looking at thought forms in the dream. Thought forms in the dream constitute the dream world, which is not the Father's kingdom. Oh, they're beautiful forms, and some are ugly forms, and some threaten you, and some look like paradise. There are places to go on vacations that are just the most wonderful forms. And there are other places that are hellholes, and they're all made of the same fabric, thought. The good of it, the evil of it. The floods we're experiencing in 8 states are human thought. You are looking at human thought and calling it a flood. You're looking at 375,000 homeless people, but you're not. God isn't seeing what you're seeing because you're seeing human thought. Now, whoever can't get this is going to have a difficulty riding into Jerusalem. And whoever hears it and doesn't dwell with it is going to have difficulty too. As a matter of fact, it's awfully difficult to accept. And yet, it's the ultimate truth that we have to face. We have to pull away the veil, the lie, which comes disguised as separate forms, separate objects, separate conditions, separate things, if we are ever to see and understand and live in the one undivided self. Your world, my world, his world, her world, is the dream of a world mind. And we have been accomplices to our own suicide, to our own pains, to our own grievances. And oh, it's easy after you begin to accept it to find that you were told this in practically every word of the Bible. Everywhere you turn, it's telling you you're living in a dream world. Look, there's Adam sleeping, dreaming about Eve coming out of his rib. Do you believe that? It's a dream, isn't it? There's all the children of Eve cursed by the father. Why, it must be a dream. Look at all the killing. It must be a dream. One son kills another son. Do you think it's happening, or is it a dream? And there's a flood, and everything on the earth is buried, except 2 of a kind. You believe it? It's all a dream. You're being told again and again and again, get out of the dream. And the secret of the dream is world thought. Individually interpreted as human thought. You're in a room right now, but you're not in a room. Who says you're in a room? Your mind says you're in a room. And your mind doesn't know where you are, because your mind is a dream mind. And all it can know is a dream world, a dream room. And so you look at the walls and you say, there it is, there's the wall. We can burn those walls with a match. We can crush those walls with a hammer. We can't do that to God's creation. In the dream, we can do every kind of deviltry imaginable. In the dream, we can kill people. That's because it's in the dream. And that's why in the dream we die. When the thought runs out, the death occurs. The end of thought is the end of the dream for that individual. Now, science helps us. Science is invisibly one of the great arms that is giving us an answer for that which we couldn't understand, even though science doesn't know they're giving us the answer. And so you look at the wall, you say, there's the wall, but it isn't there. Science says that's atoms. That's great. That's true. That's atoms. What science can tell us is that atoms are part of the dream too. There isn't an atom in this universe that isn't part of the dream fabric of thought. The only difference is that the atoms are the thought of the world mind before your human mind gets to those atoms. The human mind only is looking at atoms. And what are you looking with? You're looking with atoms of your own eyes. Now let's get the whole picture here. There is an invisible spiritual universe right now, right here. And it's perfect. And it doesn't need correction, and that's all that's here. And in it, you're living in your reality. In it, Christ lives. In it, the Christ Jew is living now, enjoying the fruits of the Spirit, being self, being eternal, being the child of God. That is the allness, and that Christ did not incarnate as you. That Christ is all you are, and you are that Christ now behind the veil of world thought. Christ never incarnates. There is no incarnation. Christ is spirit. You are that being. I am that being. Everyone we know is that invisible being called Christ. And we all have infinite individuality in Christ. Christ John, Christ Jesus, Christ Peter, Christ you. You are there now. And then the world mind looks at this invisible spiritual creation and forms its concept called atoms. That's the first world thought, atoms. Separating the indivisible into little particles of electricity. Separate little particles. That's what you're looking at when you see a wall. And you're looking at it with the atoms of your eyes. And what makes the wall is the reaction of your eyes with its atoms to the atoms of the wall. You're looking at something you cannot see, and the atoms of your eyes reacting to the atoms that are there form and clothe those atoms with a concept called wall. The difference in speed between the atoms where the wall is and the atoms of your eyes creates the wall. You clothe everything you see with a reaction of the atoms of your eyes to the atoms that you are looking at. You're looking at the dream thought of the world mind, and that dream thought is atoms, and you're looking out of human eyes, which are made of atoms, and the reaction is wall, person, thing, place, tree. And then you say, well, why do I see a bird? Why does everybody see a bird? And the answer is simple. You look at the atoms over there and you see a bird, and I look over there and I see a bird. It's because the atoms over there are in a pattern. And if we look somewhere else, we'll both see a giraffe. Why? Because the atoms over there are in a pattern. We're reacting to the patterns of atoms. Over there, the pattern is such that we all see wall. But the atoms aren't there. God didn't put them there. The world mind did. God didn't put the atoms where your eyes are. The world mind did. The eyes that you look with are part of the dream. The atoms you're looking at are part of the dream. The reaction is part of the dream. He hangeth the earth on nothing. And so you look. Atoms react to atoms. The patterns are set by the world mind, and your reaction is modified only slightly by your heredity and environment, past experience. But basically, we're all looking at the same patterns. And we're fooled into clothing those patterns with bodies of flesh which are nothing more than our own thought reactions. Now, this is the inner formation of the dream. I'm sure in time there will be some great minds who will reveal much deeper understanding of it and fill it out with all kinds of scientific explanations. But I'm sure you can see that if the atoms of your eyes are going at such a speed and the atoms over there are going at a greater speed, your reaction to them can form an impression, which you call steel, wood, tree, bird. The forms of the world are made that way. We clothe atoms with our minds. Now then, if you can't overcome your thought, you're going to go on continuing to build a dream world, which the world mind builds through you. You'll continue an atom's dream. And so it becomes so utterly clear why we're told, take no thought for your life. Take no thought. Judge not after the appearances. Resist not evil. Be still and know. All of this is to break the continuity of the dream and to awaken us out of being a dream character, a creature who receiveth not. I gather this one is going to build that house we were just talking about. Now, the reason we're facing this today is because we're on our way to Jerusalem. And there's no way there as long as we live in the dream. Now, there are ways to start seeing through the dream. First of all, we know that others have come out of the dream, have been enlightened. We know that others have made transition. We know that others have been able to come into a way of life in which they are no longer controlled by world thought and can look through appearances unaffected by them, unaffected by the appearance of two powers, and have been reunited in oneness with that which the world mind is trying to counterfeit. Now, there is no sickness or sadness or sorrow or limitation or lack except in the dream. And when you try to correct these things and seemingly succeed and find that a week later or a month later that which you succeeded in doing seems to fall apart again, it's because you were not aware that the total circumstance and the characters in it are world, mind, dream creations, yourself included. Now, we haven't faced this, have we? We haven't been willing to. Nobody wants to tell us to face it either. It's much more pleasant to go on ignoring it, pretending that if we just do certain nice things, things will work out fine. And that's what the world's been doing. I don't know anyone you're going to tell this to, because if you do, you'll discover you really have no one to listen to you. The only time you can tell this is when you have proved to yourself that it's true. And if you haven't, you have no right to say it to another. You've got to prove it to yourself. And if it's not true, fine, that's great. Even in proving it's not true, you've done something. But you might discover that it not only is true, but it's the only truth. And that until you meet this truth and come past this truth, all that you try to do in the way of learning truth is barricaded. That you'll continue living a dream lifespan with dream people, with dream conditions, with dream financing, and it won't work. The fabric of the dream is your thought. It isn't your thought. It's what thought is forced upon you to become your thought. And you've got to break it. And that's where we'll take our break. Rest for about a few minutes in a meditation before we try to find ways to come out of world thought. The question before me here is, where does world thought come from? And I know that the answer will not be accepted because world thought doesn't exist. It's the dream too. And then the question is, well, how does a dream begin? How does it get here? Why is it here? And the only answer you can get is going to be directed to a dream mind. Because only the dream mind wants to know why, how, and when. It's part of the dream. And the best way to answer the question is to go back into a character in your dream who wants to know. And you'll see that anything he wants to know, he doesn't really want to know because he isn't there. He seems to be there, and he seems to want to know, and the point that you're not getting is that you're the dream. And therefore anything you want to know is part of the dream. And it's only when you awaken from the dream that you'll see that the mind that asks the question is part of the dream. I don't expect you to accept it. But at least the important thing to see is that we remain characters in the dream, and everything we do in the dream is part of the dream, even the desire to know. The only mind there is God. The only thought there is God, out of that divine mind. Now, while we want to know where does world thought come from, suppose you were in the flood. And your home was floating down the tide. Would you be more interested in knowing where it came from, or would you be more interested in knowing how to be safe, how to survive? Would you at that moment want to know the why and wherefore, or would you be more interested in self-preservation? Are you more interested in the truth, or are you more interested in knowing the why and the wherefore? The human mind is the natural mind. It receiveth not the things of God. The truth can only come to you from Christ. In fact, Isaiah's statement of the Christ, my thoughts are not your thoughts, is the revelation that only Christ in you can dissolve the dream and the dream mind. And only the Christ mind in you knoweth the Father. Now, we would have to be the very infinite Spirit totally in order to be able to explain why these things happen as appearances in the world mind. But we do know that the Father says, "Be ye perfect." Now, who is saying to the Father, "Explain it to me, why these things are happening"? Who is saying that? The one who is not saying that because the Father says it, it is so. There is no reason that the human mind will accept, but there is a spiritual something which says it is so. And if you're going to live within the realm of reason and want to know how it got there, you're going to miss the point of the dream, because the realm of reason is part of the dream. The illusion on the desert is there. That's a fact. The world is not your Father's kingdom. That's a fact. Now, if you want to know how the world got there, even though it's not your Father's kingdom, you'll have to come into Christ. Because nobody in this world is going to tell you how the world got there and how there could be a world mind when the world mind itself has no existence. There is no world mind. That's why the complete illusion of the dream person, the mortal being, the mortal life, the mortal lifespan, becomes a dream. It comes out of a dream mind. And you come to the vanishing point where you're left with a world mind that isn't there, but which is dreaming a dream world. And the only way you can solve that riddle is to live in the truth of that which is present. You can't solve it in a conversation or a discussion or a mind speaking to a mind. Two dream minds talking to each other will not get anywhere. You must join that Christ spirit in yourself which dissolves the world mind. And when you have the experience, you won't need the conversation or the human explanation of it. The experience is the only answer to your question. Until then, you'll have to simply know that there is no world mind to have the dream of this world, and that the complete dream of this world is in a world mind which is a dream itself. And that is precisely why it's been so difficult for mankind to step out of the dream. because it isn't aware of the condition or what's causing the condition. It only knows that somewhere in the Bible the Father said, "Be ye perfect," and it's trying so hard to be and doesn't know how to be. The homes are floating down the river, and here's the voice saying, "Be ye perfect." How? How can any one of those who have been made desolate be perfect while their homes are floating down the river? But look at it another way. When the voice says, "Be ye perfect," does it mean just on Tuesday or Wednesday, or does it mean every instant, "Be ye perfect"? Now then, if the homes are floating down the river, how can I be perfect? The answer is that I've got to see the truth that there's no home floating down the river. That's the only way I can be perfect. As long as there's a home floating down the river, you can't say you're perfect. The dream of a world that is in torment must be seen as non-existent. There is no world in torment. There is no world at war. There is no world in grief. There is no world in disease. I don't need a reason for that. It's the Father's word. My kingdom is not this world. There's no reason. It's simply the truth. And that's why I say you must find absolute truth. If you find truth that's reason, it isn't truth. The only truth that's truth is the truth spoken by the Father. That's the point. And the Father says, "This world is not my kingdom." That is all you need to know. It's a dream world. And until you're willing to accept the Father's word without further question, you'll always say, "I don't understand this." We don't have to understand the Father, you see. Those who want to understand are going to be on the outside looking in, wondering why they couldn't attain the level of Christ consciousness. The disciples couldn't understand either. It said so. But they were obedient to the Christ which says, "Do this, do that." Now, if you don't believe the truth of these words in the Bible, that's another thing. But if you do, don't let your lack of understanding of them stop you. You'll see that in a minute. Here some Greeks appear. It doesn't seem to be of major importance that suddenly a few Greeks appear at a meeting here. But they go to Philip. Philip takes them to Andrew. Together, Philip and Andrew go to Jesus. And as soon as he learned the Greeks have come, he says the most amazing thing. All through the Bible he's saying, "My hour has not yet come. Mine hour has not yet come." He repeats it and repeats it. But now a few Greeks show up at a meeting and he says, "My hour has come." Why don't they go direct to Jesus? Why do they go to Philip and then to Andrew? That's the answer to your question right there. First Philip, and then Philip goes to Andrew, and then Philip and Andrew go to Jesus. Do you see the chain of command? That Philip represents something in us, Andrew something in us, and both Philip and Andrew have to go to the Christ? And that the only way the Greeks can come to the Christ is through Philip in us and Andrew in us? Philip is the mind that says, "I don't understand." Philip is the human mind. But it understands enough to know to go to Andrew. And Andrew does understand, and Andrew has the strength, the will, to be obedient to what he understands. The outer intellect says, "All right, I heard it." But Andrew says, "I not only heard it, I will do it." This is Philip and Andrew, and together they go to "I am the Christ." It's the faith to live and to abide not in your understanding. You must transcend human understanding. As long as you want to understand, which is commendable. You're going to limit yourself to what you understand. There is a place where you do not understand, and yet you go forth. And that's the point of lean not on thine own understanding. There's a place where Philip and Andrew together move to Christ, still not knowing what they're doing. But they are obedient, and the word faith, to accept the word of the Christ beyond your own understanding. Do you see that? If you're going to say, I don't understand how the world mind gets there, and stand there and wait for that understanding, you're not going to do what Philip and Andrew do right here. Now, the importance of the Greeks will also clarify something. It's really a long, long story. The Greeks are in contrast to the Jews. Later, Paul will say there's neither Greek nor Jew. The Jews have been set up as those who, in us, are the qualities of mind that reject divine selfhood. The Jew in us says, I'm a human being, and I worship God. And there's only one God, and I worship him. And this is the rejection of the truth that God is the substance of every individual on the earth, that God is the substance of the Jew. God is the substance of the Gentile. God is the substance of the Muslim, the Hindu, etc. But the Jew in us refuses to accept that the Spirit of God is our being. And so the Jew is in the dream. The Jew lives in the dream of the world mind, thinking it's worshiping God. Now comes the Greek. And the Greek wants Christ. The Jew has rejected Christ. The Greek wants Christ. There's another phase in us. While the Jew in us is rejecting, the Greek in us is willing to be converted, wants Christ, and is coming and seeks Christ and says to Philip, we would have an audience with Jesus. And Philip, the outer mind, turns to Andrew, the strength, the obedience to faith, and says they want to see Jesus. And then the outer mind and the obedience that acts in faith to the outer mind goes in together to the Christ and says the Greeks are here, and the Christ says, mine hour has come. Why? Goes right back to Lazarus. The resurrected consciousness opened that day on earth is also manifesting as the unconverted, the unchristed, the Greeks, coming to find the Christ, showing the universality of Christ. And it goes way, way back. I think it might be well to take a minute to see it way, way back. It goes back to Egypt. It was from Egypt that the Greeks, you see, found the mysteries. And there was Orpheus, and out of Orpheus came what is called the Greek Orphic mysteries. It seems that long before Jesus Christ walked the earth, the truth that he presented was known. In fact, Orpheus was called the Greek Christ, and that was 12 centuries before Jesus Christ. They actually were teaching in Greece at that time that there is one Spirit, one God, one soul, and that God is infinite and one in number, and is the unseen Spirit behind all that we call nature. Orpheus taught that. In fact, Orpheus did many miracles. Orpheus, it was said, played a harp given to him by the gods. And you can see the meaning when you learn that that harp that he played was so celestial in its tone that great monsters came out of the sea just to listen to it. And that he could tame the storm, tame the tides, he could tame all manner of natural phenomenon. But even savage beasts would listen to this tone, and they would lose all ferocity. This was the story of Orpheus. And this became part of the mystical teachings in the mystery schools of Greece. Actually, 1,200 years before Jesus, they taught that God did not create corporeal beings, that atoms were the substance of all matter, the substance of all that was good and evil, and was not divinely created. They taught that if you did not attain your eternal soul, you would come back into this atomic illusion of corporeality. And then he had a 7-string lyre that he played beside. And always it was called music of the gods, celestial music. There were many composers who discovered the power of Orpheus. Richard Wagner was one, and later Igor Stravinsky. But there was in Greece a man named Pythagoras. And around 550, he made the teaching of Orpheus the part of his movement. And this is what fathered the understanding of Orphic mysteries right down to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But by now, you see, the pure mysticism of Asia was tempered by science and philosophy. And so they took ecstasy, as seen in the Asian, and they gave it a sense of order. They took faith and they backed it up with knowledge. Things were given a form and a substance that had, up to then had simply been in the mystical world. But then it was lost. It became too much form, too much science, too much philosophy. And so the Orphic mysteries became a forgotten mystery. It was picked up, however, by the Essenes, by Enoch among the Essenes, not the real Enoch, but the teacher among the Essenes who called himself Enoch. And so the Greeks had lost it. In other words, that part of the world which had had the mystical truth of the one divine spirit as the substance of all being, lost it. I, Spirit of God in Christ Jesus, was the very spirit of truth of Orpheus, of Pythagoras, of Socrates, of Plato, of Aristotle. Is there another spirit than I, Christ? And even though this is lost through the centuries and now pops up in the divine form called Christ Jesus, the moment the Greek appears, you see, this is a tying together of all the threads of spiritual unfoldment on the earth. Because now that which was out of the mystical truth, that seed which had been planted years before, centuries before, now is fertile. And the Greek is turning to the Christ, and East and West are meeting again. And so I, the Christ in Jesus, recognizes I, the Christ in the Greek, and this is a sign that the world is being tied into one. Now my hour has come. Much more that could be said, but there are words to be used that we're not ready for. One of them is androgynous, and you can look it up. Find out what it means, and you'll have a clue to the meaning of the Greek appearing. Further, you'll find that androgynous means neither male nor female. And Paul taught that. The union in oneself, in which one becomes pure spirit, is neither male nor female. And this was the mystical marriage signified to Jesus Christ by the Greek chain of the Orphic mysteries coming into visibility. For the story of Orpheus was the mystical marriage. Now, there's so much you could say about this sort of thing, but you'd really have to go back and study all of the things that were taught in the Greek mystery schools. And the reason it's always remained a mystery is because the basic teaching of the mystery schools, always shrouded in words, is that all corporeal existence is a universal dream. There are passages here which I think you should see about the Greek stranger. Let's first see this. There were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. The same, therefore, came to Philip, which was of Bethsaida of Galilee, and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. Philip cometh and telleth Andrew. And again Andrew and Philip tell Jesus. They came together. Understanding came with faith and the will to obey that. That's why they came together. Jesus answered them, saying, The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. There is precedence for this in various passages in the Bible. You remember, first of all, in Paul, in the Acts, that he worked among the Greeks. And there the Jews burned Jason's house, symbol of rejecting the Greeks as being important enough for the truth. And yet Paul stayed with the Greeks and did a great work among the Greeks, wrote to the Corinthians and so on. Now, earlier in the Bible, in Isaiah, we have a little hint about the Greeks. And that's 42:4. Some of this doesn't add up to reason, but it shows you the thread of prophecy. How the infinite mind, which is working there, works over here 2,000 years later, and it's really working in both areas at the same time. In Isaiah 42:4, He shall not fail nor be discouraged till he have set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law. The isles, you see, means the Grecian Isles. It doesn't say so. It was on the Isle of Patmos that John was given the great revelation about New Jerusalem. The isles shall wait for his word. The Grecian Isles had lost the real deep truth, but they would return to Christ. Isaiah, the Christ speaking through, says, the isles shall wait for his law. Here the Christ in Jesus, here's the Greeks who come. You see how it ties up? The one self, announcing what it will do and then doing it. But, more so, we see in Genesis a very strange combination. And this is really delightful if you're a Bible lover, because in Genesis we tie up Greeks and jackasses. And the whole thing is right there. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies, thy father's children. Judah's a lion, a whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. Now Shiloh is the Christ. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. Now here you see that the Christ will come on an ass's colt way back in Genesis, and it talks about the red wine, and you remember the Christ changing water to wine. You see how it begins to pull in the thread of prophecy way back in Genesis, up to Zechariah, and then in the actual appearance, but it's always the invisible Christ. That's why it appears that way. It's inevitable. And whatever the invisible Christ ordains in you is inevitable. There's no power on earth to stop it. Now, again, a stranger thing, perhaps, in Kings. And this is why, again, Jesus Christ was so sure his hour had come, because the Christ had so predicted. 1 Kings 8:41. Moreover, concerning a stranger that is not of thy people Israel, but cometh out of a far country for my name's sake. You see the vast movement of mysticism out of Greece being lost and then coming into fruition in this visible little group of Greeks coming as predicted way back in Kings, and an ass's colt way back in Genesis, and again in Zechariah, all this being woven together in one appearance. Do you feel the deep thread of truth of the Word, how it's inevitably the only thing you can follow? What else can know? What else can be reality? Do you see why that vein in you must touch this I Christ truth? Mine hour is come. And now the Greek represents the conversion of the world to Christ. This then will be the beginning of the universal nature of Christ accepted on the earth as an actual fact to be realized, and it appears within our generation. Do you know why there was to be an end of the world and what it meant now? Why would the heavens roll up like a scroll? When you awake from the dream, isn't that the effect? Isn't that exactly what happens when you awake from a dream? What is the end of the world? The end of a dream. Be ye perfect, because God didn't create these evils. They're in the dream. Where else can they be if God didn't create them? They must be in the dream. Cancer is part of a dream. Pain is part of a dream. Every limitation, every imperfection is part of a dream. It rolls up like a scroll when you awaken from the dream. And now there's a Greek here awakening from a dream. He's reaching for Christ. There's something in us that reaches for Christ, is ready to awaken from the dream. Let's go a step further. Where the dream is, God is. The dream isn't there. God is. That's why it's called a dream. Because it isn't there. But if God is there, isn't perfection there? What are you going to correct? Can you correct perfection? Now then, when you know it's a dream, when you know perfection is present where the dream seems to be, and you change your consciousness to the realization of that perfection in spite of what the dream appears to present, Isn't that the healing consciousness? Do you see that you can't really have what God didn't create? It has to be a dream. And if God didn't create a bad vision, or a bad back, or a bad heart, how can you have one? And if your heart is capable of being imperfect, how could God create it? Anything that can be imperfect cannot be God's creation. What is it? It's a dream. And so you're being told that you don't have a heart. You're dreaming about a heart. You don't have lungs. You're dreaming about lungs. You don't have a physical form. You're dreaming about a physical form. And when you awaken from the dream, you come into that consciousness gradually, which enables you to feel that which is not the human heart, but which is your spiritual self. And gradually you're awakened out of the false sense called incarnation, until there's a newborn consciousness, a cult. You're out of the false sense of self. Man, said Job, is born an ass. That's a specific quote. Man is born an ass. But the Christ says that's fine, but he can be reborn a colt with a new consciousness. Christ sitting in the saddle, riding into the higher consciousness. The mortal dream is broken. And now this turning, as you are walking, riding on the new truth, that you're not the dream. The dream is imperfection, it's good and evil. That's the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the dream. But right where the dream seems to be, ye be perfect, which is the same thing as be ye perfect. And so you're riding on the truth, right where the dream seems to be. And you're going with the faith of Andrew and the strength of Andrew, coupled with the knowledge that Philip has brought to Andrew. And the Greek, that deep desire to be converted, to return to the Father's house, is reaching for the Christ. It's all being welded into the one universal self, out of the dream. And to make sure you know it, listen. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a germ of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Now, the Orphic mysteries taught about a germ of wheat, and it taught about man being that germ of wheat. The mysteries of Greece. Now, you know the husk has to fall off for the fruit to grow. This human body, this dream image, is the husk. The human lifespan is the husk. The world is the husk. The world dream is the husk. And when you conquer it, you overcome the world dream. You're awakening from the dream. But what's awakening? That which is awakening is not in the dream. And right where you seem to be, there's something in you awakening. That's the slumbering Christ, to which the dream is asleep. It's only when you're willing to shuck off the husk, the world dream, that something in you comes alive to your consciousness. That's the meaning of it. Unless, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth not. It abideth alone. But if it die, if you let the dream be accepted, you see, you can only die to the dream. You can't die to reality. If it die, if the dream dies, It bringeth forth much fruit. Then out of the dream rises the reality of your being. That's why it's important to recognize the dream. And the best way to recognize it is to go inside and just rest there and imagine or recall a dream, anything you've dreamed, and you see how quickly that condition within the dream, whatever it was, is a perfect parallel of your human condition, which we do not recognize as the dream, although it is. He that loveth his life shall lose it. Why would they want you to lose it? You see? Because it's a dream. He that loveth his life shall lose it. And he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. Why would the Christ be saying, he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it? Are you to hate your life if it's the life of God? And if it isn't the life of God, is it not a dream? He that recognizes that his human life is a dream is he who hateth his life in this world. And he shall keep it unto life eternal. The moment you recognize the dream life, you're really recognizing the hereditary life is the dream. The physical life is the dream. The human sense of life is the dream. It's the atomic dream, all based on invisible atoms that we don't see. And as soon as you break the bubble of the atomic dream, you find your life. In a meditation the other day, we were given an interesting start on breaking the dream, which I'd like to share with you. We visioned within ourselves, first, that all being human thought, if I can step out of human thought, the dreamer, the world mind, has no channel through me to dream. And so in the stillness, the Sabbath, the fast, taking no thought, I am out of the dream. But you see, you have to establish the habit of looking at everything knowing it's thought. Doesn't matter what you look at, you have to recognize it as thought. It isn't just in your meditation. And so the habit to start is to identify the world around you and everything in it as thought. And here's one way to do it. In the quiet now, we envision this man running. He's racing. He's trying to do a 4-minute mile. And he's in his athletic suit, and he's running up the hill on the track. Fast, fast, fast. You see him in your mind. Now, if you were to see him visibly in the outer world, that would be the same as seeing him now in your mind. In your mind, as you see him run, now bring him into slow motion. So that you have a man who isn't running as fast as he was, but he's moving slowly. Just like a movie would be brought into slow motion. Every step real slow, even as he runs. You are controlling his pace to slow motion. What you've done is to slow down world thought in you. So now the man running fast is running in slow motion. It's still your thought, but it's slower thought. Now from slow motion, slow him down to no motion, so that he's not running at all. It's your thought controlling his movement. He's not running. All of this you're voluntarily controlling within your mind. And him running slower and then not at all is all your thought. And finally, dismiss the man and you have no man. No thought of a man. All in your thought. Now, as you develop this, you should be able to look out as if the man actually were in your view. And if you were to see such a man, you should be able to do the same thing in your mind while looking at him, until you realize that what you're looking at, whether it's inside your mind with your eyes closed or with your eyes wide open, you're not seeing a man, you're seeing your thought. And your thought says he's running fast, and consciously bring him into slow motion, and then into no motion, and then into disappearance. Now, as you do this, you will develop the capacity to come into no thought. This graduation or diminution from the running down to the no running, and finally no man, this becomes a habit. So we look at anything that moves, we go through the same no motion, slow motion, no motion, and then finally no object. What is out there actually? If you were dreaming about an airplane, would it be there? If you were dreaming about freeways, would they be there? They'd vanish when you awaken. When you awaken from the mortal dream, there are no freeways, there are no airplanes. You see, the Christ teaches this is a dream civilization. And everything you're looking at is world thought. And only when you are willing to form the habit of identifying it as world thought, and then knowing that you're looking at thought, don't give it the power that you thought it had. It isn't a man running. It isn't a tiger. It isn't a serpent. It isn't a bomb. It isn't a flood. I know the mind says, oh, you just send that flood right through here and it's going to drown us. What do you mean it's not a flood? Don't forget the Christ walking on the water, peace be still at his eye. The mind that says these things, it's not a flood, or it is rather, isn't accepting the truth of Christ. You're putting your mind over the truth of Christ. We're not doing that. We're accepting the truth of Christ, which says, peace be still at his eye, meaning it isn't you, it's I. And that storm is still, because I, the Christ, am the reality there, and the storm at sea is world thought. Don't overlook the miracles. They are revealing that world thought appears as the problem, and divine thought appears as the solution. When you're not in this world thought, you slow down the world to slow motion, and then no motion, and then no world. As you begin to look out that way, you'll begin to feel the non-power of what had appeared to be matter, which was nothing more than your mind clothing the world with a material garment. As your thought is refined out of thought, divine thought will take over, lifting the Son of Man. The ear of corn must die. We must overcome our mortal sense of life, which is human thought. That's the fabric of the world, the fabric of mortal life. Now, I've given you quite a number of things to do, and it's in the doing that you find the capacity to stand before the so-called powers of the world, knowing that they exist only in your thought. There are no external powers because there is no external world. There is only your thought appearing to you as a world. That's pretty big stuff to sit and digest in one meeting. But if you are able to listen to it on your tape, or you'll be hearing more of it again, I'm sure, here, you will begin to see that thought is the nature of the world. And divine thought is the nature of the kingdom. You ride to Jerusalem on divine thought, not on human thought. And heaven replaces earth. This is the mystical message of the infinite way, not the letter of truth. Don't worry if you don't understand it. The disciples weren't picked for their great understanding. They were picked for their obedience and their faith to the word of the Christ. Understanding then came later. Next week is July 4th, and we'll be open. You might try to be somewhat inventive, although we had a runner running the 4-minute mile, slowed down in slow motion. You could take the tides of the ocean and see that they are nothing but thought. Slow them down in your mind. Don't expect the tides out there to slow down, or don't expect the runner to slow down out there. But you get the habit of recognizing this is thought. And instead of thought controlling you, ultimately you'll decide that it's very possible for divine thought to come in and dissolve human thought as you diminish your thought that way. That's how we're going to break the veil of thought.